The phone rang at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, jolting me awake in my cramped studio apartment in downtown Portland. I fumbled for my Nokia, squinting at the caller ID through bleary eyes. Mom. At this hour, it could only mean one thing: something was terribly wrong. Elena, honey, are you awake? Mom's voice carried that familiar tension I'd grown to recognize over the years. I am now, I mumbled, sitting up and running my fingers through my tangled auburn hair. What's wrong? Is Dad okay? There was a pause. The kind of pause that makes your stomach drop and your mind race through worst-case scenarios. I could hear Dad's muffled voice in the background, along with what sounded like papers rustling. Well, sweetie, we need to talk about Thanksgiving, she finally said, her words careful and measured. Your father and I have been discussing our finances, and with the mortgage refinancing and your brother Kevin's college tuition for next semester at Northwestern. My heart sank. I knew where this was heading. We think it might be best if you skip coming home to Cedar Rapids this year. I know it's hard to hear, but the cost of your flight from Oregon, plus feeding everyone, and with your Aunt Dorothy's family coming too. She trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging in the chilly November air like a deflated balloon. I stared at the water stain on my ceiling that looked suspiciously like Texas. Here I was, 26 years old, working 2 jobs, waitressing at Murphy's Diner downtown and doing freelance graphic design on the side, barely scraping by in a city where rent ate up most of my paycheck. The thought of spending Thanksgiving alone in my shoebox apartment, eating a frozen turkey dinner while watching football, made my chest tighten. I understand, I heard myself saying, though every fiber of my being wanted to protest. Money's tight for everyone right now. You're such a good daughter, Mom's voice cracked slightly. We'll make it up to you at Christmas, I promise. Your father's hoping his overtime at the John Deere plant will pick up by then. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my apartment, listening to the city's nighttime symphony, distant sirens, the rumble of late-night delivery trucks, my upstairs neighbor's television bleeding through the thin walls. The digital clock on my microwave glowed accusingly, 3:15 a.m. Sleep would be impossible now. I padded to my tiny kitchen and made a cup of instant coffee, even though caffeine was the last thing I needed. As I stirred in the powdered creamer, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than tight finances. My parents had never been wealthy, but they'd also never asked me to skip a holiday before. Something felt off, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Little did I know, the real story was just beginning to unfold, and by Christmas morning, everything I thought I knew about my family would be turned completely upside down. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and drizzling, perfectly matching my mood as I stared out my apartment window at the empty Portland streets. Most of the city had fled to family gatherings, leaving behind an eerily quiet downtown that felt like a ghost town. I'd volunteered to work the morning shift at Murphy's Diner, partly for the holiday pay and partly to avoid wallowing in self-pity. The dinner crowd was sparse, mostly lonely souls like myself, truck drivers passing through, and a few elderly regulars who had nowhere else to go. Old Pete, who came in every Thursday for his black coffee and apple pie, patted my hand sympathetically when I served his usual. "Family troubles, kiddo?" he asked, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Something like that," I managed, forcing a smile. "They're having financial difficulties." Pete nodded knowingly. "Been there myself. Sometimes families have to make tough choices." But even as he said it, I caught something in his expression, a flicker of doubt that mirrored my own growing suspicions. By afternoon, I was home again, having turned down my coworker Janet's invitation to join her family dinner. I appreciated the gesture, but I wasn't in the mood to play the role of the cheerful adopted guest. Instead, I heated up a turkey and mashed potato frozen dinner and settled onto my second-hand couch with a glass of cheap wine. That's when my phone started buzzing with social media notifications. Instagram photos from high school friends, all gathered around elaborate dining room tables laden with golden turkeys, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pies. There was Amanda Chun posting from her parents' house in Seattle, and there was my college roommate Rebecca showing off her grandmother's famous stuffing recipe in Denver. But it was the final photo that stopped me cold. My brother Kevin had posted a picture from what was clearly our family dining room back in Cedar Rapids. I recognized Mom's good china, the oak table Dad had built in his garage workshop, and the autumn leaf centerpiece that had graced our Thanksgiving table for as long as I could remember. Kevin was grinning at the camera, his arm around his girlfriend Stephanie. In the background, I could make out familiar faces, Aunt Dorothy and Uncle Frank, their twin boys Connor and Blake, and even Great-Aunt Meredith who lived in the assisted living facility across town. The caption read, "Grateful for family time. Mom outdid herself this year with the honey-glazed ham and sweet potato casserole. #blessed #family #Thanksgiving 2024 inch." I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. There they all were, my entire family, gathered around the same table where I'd grown up carving my initials as a bored 8-year-old. The same table where we'd celebrated my high school graduation, where I'd announced my acceptance to Portland State University, where I'd shared my dreams of becoming a successful graphic designer. And I wasn't there. Not because of money, as my parents had claimed, but because they simply hadn't wanted me there. The realization hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. I set down my plastic fork, my appetite completely gone, and reached for my phone with trembling fingers. The betrayal burned in my chest as I scrolled through more photos Kevin had posted throughout the day. Mom laughing as she carved the turkey. Dad raising a toast. Even our ancient golden retriever Buster, wearing a pilgrim hat and looking thoroughly unimpressed. They hadn't cancelled Thanksgiving. They had cancelled me. I spent the next 3 days in a haze of hurt and confusion, calling in sick to both my jobs and surviving on a diet of leftover Chinese takeout and wounded pride. By Sunday evening, I'd worked up the courage to call my brother Kevin directly. If anyone would give me straight answers, it would be him. "Elena." "Hey sis." Kevin's voice was warm and familiar when he picked up. "How was your Thanksgiving? Did you end up going to that friend's house you mentioned?" "Cut the crap, Kevin," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I saw your Instagram posts. You were all there. At home. With Mom and Dad." The silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Kevin sighed deeply. "Ah hell. I told Mom this was a bad idea. I told her you'd find out." "Find out what, exactly?" My grip tightened on the phone. What did I do wrong? What's so terrible about me that my own family doesn't want me around for Thanksgiving? "It's not like that, Elena. It's complicated." Kevin's voice took on that cautious tone I remembered from childhood, the one he used when he was about to deliver bad news. "Look, can we meet somewhere? This isn't a conversation for the phone." 2 hours later, I found myself sitting across from Kevin at Thompson's Coffee House in downtown Portland, a neutral location he'd driven down to from Eugene where he was finishing his senior year at the University of Oregon. He looked older than his 22 years, stress lines creasing his forehead as he stirred sugar into his cappuccino. "Mom and Dad didn't want to hurt you," he began carefully. "But Aunt Dorothy has been saying things about you, about your lifestyle." "My lifestyle?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean being broke and single in Portland? That's hardly scandalous." Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "She thinks you're going through a rebellious phase. The way you dress, your job, the fact that you haven't settled down with a nice guy from Cedar Rapids like she thinks you should have by now." The puzzle pieces were starting to click together, forming a picture I didn't like. Aunt Dorothy, my father's sister, had always been the self-appointed family moral compass. She was the one who'd criticized my decision to move to Portland instead of staying home and working at the local bank. She was the one who'd made snide comments about my unconventional career choices at every family gathering. And Mom and Dad just agreed with her? The words tasted bitter in my mouth. Kevin ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that it made my heart ache. "They're scared, Elena. Dorothy threatened to boycott family gatherings if you were there. She said she didn't want her boys exposed to your bad influence. Mom was terrified of splitting the family apart. So instead, they decided to cut me out completely." "It was supposed to be temporary," Kevin said quickly. "Just until Dorothy calmed down, until you maybe got a more traditional job or found a boyfriend or something. They thought if they could smooth things over with her first." "They could what?" "Negotiate the terms of my acceptance back into the family." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'm their daughter, Kevin. I'm not some distant relative they can just write off when I become inconvenient." Kevin reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. "They know they messed up. Mom's been crying for days. She wanted to call you, but she didn't know how to explain." I pulled my hand away, anger and hurt warring in my chest. Well, they're about to get their chance. Because I'm driving home to Cedar Rapids tomorrow, and we're going to have this conversation face to face. As I walked out of the coffee shop and into the cold Portland night, I had no idea that my decision to confront my parents would set in motion a chain of events that would expose family secrets going back decades, and ultimately change everything I thought I knew about the people I'd called family my entire life. The 8-hour drive from Portland to Cedar Rapids gave me plenty of time to rehearse what I'd say to my parents, but as I pulled my beat-up Honda Civic into the familiar driveway of my childhood home, all my prepared speeches evaporated. The house looked exactly the same: white picket fence, Mom's flower boxes now dormant for winter, Dad's workshop light glowing in the detached garage where he was probably tinkering with some engine. The front porch light flickered on before I'd even turned off the engine. Mom appeared in the doorway, still wearing her favorite apron decorated with dancing turkeys, a gag gift I'd given her 3 Christmases ago. Even from a distance, I could see the guilt written across her face. Elena. Dad emerged behind her, wiping grease-stained hands on a shop towel. What are you doing here, sweetheart? You said you couldn't afford the trip. We need to talk, I said, climbing the front steps with legs that felt like lead. The November wind cut through my jacket, but the chill I felt had more to do with the reception I was expecting than the Iowa weather. We gathered in the living room where I'd spent countless evenings doing homework and watching television with my family. Mom bustled around, offering coffee and leftover pie, her nervous energy filling the space like static electricity. Dad settled into his worn leather recliner, the same chair where he'd read me bedtime stories and helped me with algebra homework. Kevin told me about Aunt Dorothy, I said without preamble, wanting to get this over with. He told me about her ultimatum. Mom's hands stilled on the coffee pot. Dad's face went ashen. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly in the sudden silence. Honey, you have to understand, Mom began, but I held up a hand to stop her. No, you need to understand something. I'm 26 years old. I have 2 jobs, I pay my own rent, I've never been arrested or addicted to drugs or done anything that should bring shame on this family. The only thing I'm guilty of is not living the life that Aunt Dorothy thinks I should live. It's not that simple, Dad said quietly. Dorothy controls a lot of family decisions. She's got strong opinions about how things should be done. Since when? I demanded. Since when does Aunt Dorothy get to decide who's welcome at our family table? This is your house, your family. When did you hand over that power to her? Mom sank onto the couch, her face crumpling. She threatened to take the boys to her ex-husband's family for holidays. Connor and Blake worship their Uncle Frank. And your great-aunt Meredith. Dorothy handles all her care decisions since she moved to Sunset Manor. If Dorothy cuts us off. The full scope of the manipulation was becoming clear. Aunt Dorothy hadn't just threatened to boycott family gatherings, she'd threatened to dismantle them entirely, taking key family members with her. She'd positioned herself as the gatekeeper of family unity, using my cousins and great-aunt as leverage. So you chose them over me, I said, the words coming out flatter than I'd intended. We chose family peace over family conflict, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. We hoped it would be temporary. That maybe if you came back with good news, a promotion, a nice boyfriend, something Dorothy could point to as you getting your life together. My life is together. I exploded, all my careful composure finally cracking. I moved to Portland to chase my dreams, not because I was running away from responsibility. I work 60-hour weeks trying to build a career in graphic design while waiting tables to pay the bills. I'm not asking for your money or your approval, I just wanted to be part of my own family. Mom was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her cheeks. We know we handled this wrong. We've known it since the moment you hung up the phone on Thanksgiving morning. But Dorothy was so insistent, and we were scared of losing everyone else too. Well, congratulations, I said, standing up and grabbing my purse. You didn't lose everyone else. You just lost me. But as I reached the front door, something made me turn back. Maybe it was the broken look on my parents' faces, or maybe it was the family photo on the mantel, all of us together at Kevin's high school graduation, arms wrapped around each other, genuinely happy. Something about this whole situation still didn't add up. There's more to this story, isn't there? I asked. This isn't just about Dorothy disapproving of my lifestyle choices. What aren't you telling me? The look that passed between my parents confirmed what I'd suspected. There were deeper currents running through this family drama, secrets that went beyond simple disapproval and financial concerns. "Tell me the truth," I said. "All of it. Or I'm walking out that door and you'll never see me again." Dad's shoulders sagged as if the weight of years had suddenly settled on them. He looked at Mom, who gave him a barely perceptible nod, and then he did something I'd never seen him do in my entire life. He started to cry. "Sit down, Elena," Mom said softly. "Please. There are things about this family that you don't know. Things we should have told you years ago." I remained standing, my hand still on the doorknob, but I didn't leave. Something in their expressions told me I was about to learn something that would change everything. "Dorothy isn't just upset about your lifestyle," Dad began, his voice thick with emotion. "She's angry because you're not really her niece." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean I'm not really her niece?" Mom stood up and walked to the old secretary desk in the corner of the room, the one that had belonged to my grandmother. She pulled out a manila envelope that looked like it had been handled many times over the years. With trembling fingers, she extracted a set of documents. "Your father and I tried for years to have children," she said quietly. "We went through fertility treatments, specialists, everything we could afford. Nothing worked. We'd almost given up when Kevin came along, our miracle baby. But we still wanted more children, wanted to give him a sibling." She handed me the papers. "Adoption documents. My adoption documents. You were 3 months old when we brought you home," Dad continued. "The most beautiful baby girl we'd ever seen. From the moment we held you, you were ours. Completely, totally ours. We never thought of you as anything other than our daughter." I stared at the documents, my hand shaking as I read my birth mother's name, Jennifer Martinez, age 16. Father, unknown. The papers were dated 26 years ago, just a few months after my birthday, or what I'd always thought was my birthday. "Dorothy never accepted you," Mom whispered. "She said we should have kept trying for real children instead of taking in someone else's mistake. She spent 26 years making little comments, asking when we were going to tell you the truth, suggesting that you didn't really belong. When you decided to move to Portland," Dad added, "Dorothy saw it as proof that she'd been right all along. She said adopted children always eventually leave their families to search for their real parents. She convinced herself that your independence was a rejection of us." The room was spinning. I sank onto the couch, still clutching the adoption papers. Everything I'd thought I knew about myself, about my family, about my place in the world, was crumbling around me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "At first you were too young," Mom said, sitting beside me and tentatively taking my hand. "Then when you got older, you seemed so happy, so secure in who you were. We were afraid that telling you would make you feel different, unwanted. We were selfish, we didn't want to risk losing you. And Dorothy used that against you," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "She held it over your heads all these years." Dad nodded. Every family gathering, every holiday, she'd make some comment about blood family versus chosen family. She'd watch your reactions, waiting for signs that you suspected something. When you started talking about feeling like you didn't fit in, about wanting to explore the world beyond Cedar Rapids, she took it as validation of her theories about adopted children. "So when she gave you the ultimatum about Thanksgiving," I said slowly, "it wasn't just about my lifestyle. It was about her finally getting to prove she was right about me not belonging." "We should have stood up to her years ago," Mom said, tears streaming down her face. "We should have told her that blood doesn't make a family, love does. You are our daughter, Elena. You always have been, from the moment we brought you home." I looked around the room that had been my childhood sanctuary, seeing it with new eyes. The family photos on the mantel suddenly took on different meanings. I could see now what I'd never noticed before, how I looked different from the rest of them, how my dark hair and olive complexion stood out among their fair Midwestern features. But I could also see something else in those photos, the genuine love and joy in my parents' faces whenever they looked at me. Whatever their mistakes had been, their love for me had never been in question. "There's more," Dad said quietly. "Your birth mother, Jennifer, she left contact information. If you ever wanted to find her, to know more about where you came from. We've kept it all these years, waiting for you to ask." He handed me another envelope, this one thicker and worn around the edges. "Letters," he explained. "She writes every year on your birthday. We never knew if we should give them to you or not." 26 letters from a woman I'd never met, who'd been thinking about me every year since the day she gave me up. My hands trembled as I held the envelope, knowing that inside was a connection to a part of myself I'd never known existed. But first, I had a family crisis to resolve, and a manipulative aunt to confront. Armed with the truth about my adoption and a new understanding of the family dynamics that had shaped my life, I insisted that my parents call a family meeting. It was time to confront Aunt Dorothy directly and end her decades-long campaign of emotional manipulation. "She won't come if she knows you're here," Mom warned as Dad reluctantly dialed Dorothy's number. "She thinks she's won. She thinks she's finally proven her point about you not belonging." "Then don't tell her I'm here," I said. "Just tell her you want to discuss family holiday plans going forward. Let her come over here feeling triumphant, and then we'll see how she handles the truth." An hour later, Aunt Dorothy's silver Buick pulled into our driveway. Through the living room window, I watched her stride up the front walk with the confident bearing of someone who believed she held all the cards. She was dressed in her usual church-appropriate outfit, navy blue suit, sensible shoes, her gray hair styled in the same rigid set she'd worn for the past 20 years. I positioned myself in the front hallway, just out of sight but close enough to hear everything. My parents greeted Dorothy at the door, their voices strained with nervous tension. "I hope you've had time to think about what I said," Dorothy announced as she settled into the living room, her voice carrying that familiar note of self-righteous authority. "About the importance of maintaining family standards and values. Thanksgiving went so much more smoothly without certain disruptive influences." "Actually, Dorothy," Dad said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it all evening, "we've done a lot of thinking, and we've realized we made a terrible mistake." "Mistake?" Dorothy's voice sharpened. "What kind of mistake?" That was my cue. I stepped into the living room, watching as Dorothy's face cycled through surprise, anger, and finally, cold calculation. "Hello, Aunt Dorothy," I said calmly. "I thought it was time we had an honest conversation about my place in this family." Dorothy's spine stiffened. "I don't know what you think you're doing here, Elena, but your parents and I were having a private discussion about family matters." "Family matters that concern me directly," I replied, taking a seat across from her. "Like your belief that adopted children don't really belong in their families." The color drained from Dorothy's face. She shot accusing looks at my parents. "You told her?" "We should have told her years ago," Mom said, moving to stand beside my chair in a gesture of solidarity that meant everything to me. "We should have told her, and we should have told you to stop your manipulative games." "Manipulative?" Dorothy's voice rose to a pitch that could have shattered glass. "I was protecting this family. I was trying to preserve what we've built together. You can't just take in any stray child and expect them to." "Any stray child?" I interrupted, my own voice deadly calm. "Is that what you think I am? Is that what you've thought for 26 years? Dorothy's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. In that moment, I saw her clearly for what she was. Not a protective family matriarch, but a small, frightened woman who used control and cruelty to mask her own insecurities. "You've spent my entire life trying to make me feel like I didn't belong," I continued, making little comments about real family and blood relatives. Questioning my choices, my independence, my right to make my own decisions about my life. And when that wasn't enough to drive me away, you manipulated my parents into excluding me from family gatherings. "Now wait just a minute," Dorothy started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished." "You used my cousins and great-aunt Meredith as leverage, threatening to break up family gatherings unless my parents chose between you and me. You turned my love for this family into a weapon against me." Dorothy looked to my parents for support, but found none. Dad had moved to stand behind Mom, his hands on her shoulders, both of them presenting a united front I hadn't seen in years. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, standing up and walking to the mantel where all our family photos were displayed. I picked up the most recent one, last Christmas, all of us together, even Dorothy smiling at the camera. "You're going to apologize to my parents for putting them in an impossible position. You're going to apologize to me for 26 years of emotional abuse. And you're going to accept that I am a member of this family, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." "And if I refuse?" Dorothy's voice was barely above a whisper, but the venom was still there. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then you're free to spend your holidays however you choose. But you'll be spending them without us." Mom, Dad, Kevin, and I are a family, with or without your approval. The only person who gets to decide whether you're part of that family is you." Dorothy sat in stunned silence for a long moment, clearly trying to process this reversal of power. She'd spent so many years being the one who issued ultimatums that she didn't know how to respond when the tables were turned. Finally, she spoke, her voice small and defeated. I was trying to protect what we had. I was afraid that if you found out about the adoption, you'd leave us for your birth family. So instead, you tried to push me away first," I said. "Dorothy, love doesn't work that way. Family doesn't work that way. The more you try to control it, the more likely you are to lose it." As I watched my aunt grapple with the consequences of her actions, I realized that this confrontation wasn't just about setting boundaries, it was about healing wounds that had been festering in our family for decades. But would Dorothy choose healing, or would she choose to remain trapped in her fears and prejudices? Three weeks later, I was back in Cedar Rapids for Christmas, but this time the circumstances were entirely different. Dorothy had indeed apologized, first to my parents, and then to me, in a conversation that was awkward and halting but genuine. She admitted that her fears about losing family members had driven her to become controlling and manipulative, and she asked for a chance to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't going to be easy or immediate, but it was a start. The real surprise came on Christmas Eve, when I finally worked up the courage to open the envelope of letters from my birth mother, Jennifer. My parents sat with me in the living room, the Christmas tree lights twinkling softly as I read 26 years' worth of birthday messages from a woman who had never stopped thinking about me. The letters painted a picture of a young woman who had made an impossible decision out of love. Jennifer had been 17 when she wrote the first letter, explaining that she was working 2 jobs to finish high school and couldn't provide the life she wanted me to have. She wrote about choosing my parents because she could see how much they already loved me, how they looked at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. Over the years, her letters chronicled her life, finishing school, becoming a nurse, getting married, having 2 more children. But every year without fail, she wrote to me on my birthday, sharing her hopes for my happiness and her gratitude to my parents for giving me the life she couldn't. The most recent letter, written just a month ago, included something that made my breath catch, a photograph. Jennifer, now 42, standing with her husband and their 2 children, a boy and a girl who looked to be about 10 and 12. They were at what appeared to be a community health clinic, all of them wearing scrubs or volunteer t-shirts. "She became a nurse," I whispered, staring at the photo. "She dedicates her life to helping people." "Just like you dedicate your life to your art," Mom said softly. "Different paths, but the same caring heart." The letter that accompanied the photo was longer than the others. Jennifer wrote that she'd always wondered if I might want to meet someday, but she'd never wanted to intrude on the life my parents had built for me. She included her phone number and email address, along with a simple message: "If you ever want to know more about where you came from, I'm here. But I want you to know that from everything your parents have shared with me over the years through their annual updates, you've become exactly the kind of person I hoped you would be." Annual updates. I looked at my parents in amazement. "You've been in touch with her all these years?" I asked. Dad nodded sheepishly. "We send her school photos, report cards, graduation pictures. We thought someday you might want to know that she never forgot you, that she's been cheering for your success from afar." On Christmas morning, as our extended family gathered around the breakfast table, including Dorothy, who was making a visible effort to include me in conversations and ask genuine questions about my life in Portland, I realized that families aren't just about blood or adoption papers or shared DNA. They're about the people who choose to love you, support you, and fight for you when times get tough. Kevin gave me a framed photo he'd secretly taken at Thanksgiving, not the posed family shot he'd posted on Instagram, but a candid moment of Mom and Dad looking sadly at my empty chair at the dinner table. The raw emotion on their faces told the story of parents who'd made a terrible mistake and knew it. "I kept it to remind myself to never let anyone divide our family again," he said quietly. "We're stronger together." Later that afternoon, as we were cleaning up wrapping paper and preparing Christmas dinner, I stepped out onto the front porch to make a phone call. My hands shook slightly as I dialed the number from Jennifer's letter. "Hello." The voice that answered was warm and slightly nervous. "Hi," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is Elena. Elena Patterson. I I got your letters. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like forever. Then I heard what sounded like a sob of joy. Elena, Jennifer whispered. Oh, sweetheart. I've been hoping for this call for 26 years. As we talked, I looked through the front window at my family, my parents, my brother, even Aunt Dorothy, all working together to prepare our Christmas feast. They were my family, the people who had raised me and loved me and shaped me into who I was. But now I had the opportunity to learn about another part of my story, another family who had never stopped caring about me. I'd like to meet you, I told Jennifer. Maybe sometime this spring, when I can get time off work. I'd love that, she replied. Your parents raised an amazing daughter, Elena. I can't wait to hear about your life, your dreams, everything. When I hung up the phone and went back inside, Mom looked at me questioningly. I'm going to meet her, I said simply. But this doesn't change anything about us. You're my parents. This is my family. Meeting Jennifer is just adding another chapter to the story. Mom's eyes filled with tears as she hugged me tightly. We love you so much, sweetheart. We're so proud of who you've become. As we sat down to Christmas dinner that evening, I looked around the table at my imperfect, complicated, loving family. We'd survived secrets and manipulation, hurt feelings and difficult truths. We'd learned that family isn't about perfection, it's about forgiveness, growth, and the courage to fight for each other when it matters most. And next Thanksgiving? I'd be right here where I belonged, with my family around me and a full heart, grateful for the long winding journey that had brought us all back together.